Hi there. In this video, I'm going to present my loose but hopefully logical speculation on what's going to be in the upcoming phases of the nascent World of Westeros cinematic universe being developed by Warner Discovery. That they didn't know if House of the Dragon Season 1 would be a hit, and after it was, they went on pause in early 2023 for a couple of months and said, we're planning out what we're going to do on a scale of years. And I'm not trying to present a wish list here. The point of this video is to say there are certain obvious limiting factors to how fast, how many shows they can make, and in what order. But just, applying common sense, there's 3 common sense principles you apply to this, you can get a pretty good feel for an outline of what they're going to do. I'm trying to limit the rampant discussion. Now, in the past month, there were a couple of updates that threw my plans into chaos, from delays because of the writer's strike. For budget, one thing shifted to animation, so this is the broad strokes version, shorter, because less is certain now, particularly for Phase 1. But in my original version, I developed these 3 grand rules, these 3 laws of the psychohistory of predicting TV show schedules. But I'll present them here because they pretty much still hold up. First law. When the news first leaks that a project is being considered, to when it actually premieres on screen, usually takes at least 2 years. A year to write it and a year to film it. This mostly applies to Phase 1, that if we hadn't heard of anything already, it wouldn't be in Phase 1. That's basically what that means, despite what the clickbaiters say. Second law. In the streaming TV era from 2019 onward, top flagship shows usually have a 1.5 turnaround time between TV seasons. They got so big focusing on movie-level quality over quantity, things just don't come out every 12 months like they did a full decade ago on early Game of Thrones. That isn't a thing. And it's weird how people got upset about that, and they're never going to do that again. Other shows don't do that. Rings of Power, Wheel of Time, Star Wars, Marvel projects, it doesn't happen. The bigger flagship shows take a 1.5 years, but there are smaller secondary shows that could come out every year. Third law. This is the most important. Current major TV cinematic universes, such as Star Wars and Marvel, have never tried to put out more than 3 TV shows per year, broadly in slots from spring, summer, and fall. Otherwise, they'd risk oversaturation. But in addition to these 3 laws, and underneath all of them, superseding them, is another one which I guess we might as well dub the zeroth law, because 0 precedes 1. Of this psychohistory of predicting TV shows. The 3 laws only apply to live-action TV series, not animation. Animated projects particularly ignore the 3rd law. Obviously, their production schedules are very different, but most of all, they don't worry about oversaturating with cartoons. When you look at Marvel and Star Wars, usually they'll try to put out a spring, summer, and fall live-action show. Then to cover the gaps between them, they'll put out The Bad Batch or something. They'll put out animation. That is harder to predict because they don't consider them as overlapping. They might be willing to make more animated content. I can't really predict that. Another thing that's kind of on the fence is live-action movies, because we know they do want to make a Targaryen conquest movie. Does that count as one of the 3 slots or not? I don't know. Another thing is, across a full phase, which I define as the run of a flagship show lasting like 6 or 7 years, you could have more than 3 shows because some are alternating. You could have 4, outside chance of 5, but more like 4 shows in a single phase because there's an off year for one of the other ones. But I'm trying to limit people making wish lists of these are the half dozen things you want to see in the next 5 years. Like the first rule that if we haven't heard about it already, that they pitched it with a writer formally, they're not going to produce it within Phase 1. The turnaround time is too long. Production time. Flagship shows take longer to make, and particularly with the later phases, they're not going to make more than 3, maybe 4 things at a given time. Now, my later phases really still hold up, but the Phase 1 is thrown into chaos by all the recent delays, from the writer's strike, from the animation. So let me just quickly run through my original model before it got ruined so you can see how we got here. So this is out of date. My original model was summer 2024, we get House of the Dragon Season 2. Then summer 2025, we get Dunk and Egg Season 1. Dunk and Egg is not a flagship show. It is the entire selling point is it's shorter and easier to make. It's a smaller set of characters at a single tournament. Even the later second and third ones aren't that big. And they said when they greenlit it, we're going to do the first 3 hopefully every 12 months. And I thought the only way this works is if you put it every summer for 3 years. And that worked when we originally thought. They said they were casting in early last year to start filming in March. And they just announced we've moved filming to June. And announced that the release date will be much later. The release date for Season 1 of Dunk and Egg will actually be fall of 2025. So my schedule here is thrown into chaos. But the original plan was House of the Dragon Season 2 this summer, Dunk and Egg next summer. Then when we're 2 years into this, production will have caught up on that and the other nascent projects that 2026, things get interesting. I originally thought spring we'd have House of the Dragon Season 3, then Dunk and Egg Season 2 in summer, then a gap in fall of 26, another gap spring of 27, summer 27 we get Dunk and Egg 3 again, and then because House of the Dragon would come out every year and a half, fall of 27 we get House of the Dragon Season 4. Then both Dunk and Egg and House of the Dragon would need to go on break. They take a gap year in 28 because Dunk and Egg would have caught up with the print novellas. The fourth novella, She-Wolves of Winterfell, isn't written yet, but there's notes for it, so it would take longer to make. Whereas House of the Dragon, long story short, we think Season 5 would be The Hour of the Wolf. And arguably that's Season 1 of a Regency show that would last 3 to 4 seasons. And there's this debate, would they call it Season 1 of the Regency show, or would they call it Seasons 5 through 8 of House of the Dragon, because it's a direct sequel. Matter of semantics. But either way, I kind of think that both Dunk and Egg and House of the Dragon will need to go on break at roughly the same time in 2028. And to fill that gap, they could put in the Targaryen Conquest movie. And I think Targaryen Conquest as a 5-season thing, Season 1 turned into a movie, but 5 acts from the Conquest through the Fall of Maegor would be the flagship of Phase 2. That marks the beginning of Phase 2. Just as the Dance of the Dragons show, House of the Dragon, is the flagship of Phase 1, the flagship of Phase 2 is Targaryen Conquest from the landing through Maegor. All of this thrown into chaos because of 2 things. First, everything's delayed from the strike, but at the same time, Warner Discovery is eager to get stuff out sooner instead of later because they need cash. So could Targaryen Conquest movie come out as early as Christmas of 26 if they want it sooner instead of later and feel that a live-action movie does not overlap with live-action TV shows? Another thing is you want them to overlap a little at the end. That what if, in terms of getting a new audience to stay, if you go, this is the end of the current form of the Dance of the Dragon story and Dunk and Egg go on gap for a year, what if the audiences leave and don't stick around for this new thing, Targaryen Conquest? Wouldn't it be better to air the Targaryen Conquest movie in the summer before Season 4 of House of the Dragon that fall, to win them back, and to keep them, consistent? Not everyone might leave if you have a sudden drop-off like that, I don't know. And in my original plan, because we heard they were working on Young Corlys and Nymeria, I thought, well, those 2 gaps, because there's 3 slots per year, that fall of 26, you put Young Corlys the Sea Snake in, and then spring of 27, you have Nymeria and the 10,000 Ships of the Rhoynar. Obviously, all of this was thrown into chaos when there were delays that Dunk and Egg is now coming out probably every fall. Sea Snake got shifted to animation. They haven't said Nymeria was shifted to animation yet, but it might be being retooled as a movie trilogy. There's a serious possibility of that because Targaryen Conquest is movies. I'm not sure. And another factor is it's not just calendar dates, but they're tied to seasons. That, they can't film in winter for things that are set in summer. So maybe House of the Dragon wouldn't consistently be coming out every year and a half, that they have to start filming in spring to finish in December to then air the next summer. Maybe we will always be seeing House of the Dragon in summer and Dunk and Egg in fall. Well, for about the 2 or 3 years that they overlap by 26. I'm not really sure, and yes, there are problems with predicting what's going on in Phase 1, particularly with I don't know what they're doing with Nymeria. That's because of all the recent complications, but moving on from that, and this is the short version, I'm 10 minutes into this, I'm getting to the core of this, of the longer scale stuff. The original version of this was an hour long, now I'm just breezing through it. What would be in Phases 2 and 3 is just a logical extension of what stories chronologically follow other stories. Well, like I said, the flagship show of Phase 2 would be Targaryen Conquest. It would shift from House of the Dragon to this Targaryen Conquest thing running 5 seasons through the fall of Maegor in Season 5. Though the first season would be turned into a theatrical movie to condense it instead, I actually think that works better. House of the Dragon would sort of continue as a direct sequel show on the Regency era, to the point we can discuss, do we call this Season 1 of the Regency show, or Seasons 5 through 7, 8 of House of the Dragon? When they were talking about, could we reuse, people misquote this so much, when they said we could just keep calling it House of the Dragon and go forward, they're not going to call the Targaryen Conquest show House of the Dragon. What they were referring to was probably that we keep going chronologically into the Regency era. Particularly because there are book chapters to adapt from this that we don't have for other eras, like Aegon IV, the Unworthy and stuff. Fire and Blood Part 2 isn't out yet. But going by that, there's print chapters that you could easily turn into a show, have a good guide for, as opposed to more loose stuff from the World Book. House of the Dragon itself is pretty much, we think, doing about 2 chapters per season, give or take. And after the Hour of the Wolf, there's 4 chapters left. There's like 2 seasons with other storylines. And by his comments, it seems Ryan Condal actually considers the Hour of the Wolf to be the first part of the Regency, not the last part of the dance, for reasons that should be obvious if you've read it. And he might want to leave as showrunner before that. I think of it like how Denis Villeneuve said people should keep making Dune movies. I just personally, it's very taxing. I intend to leave after the 3rd one, but I hope someone continues to adapt the later books. It seems that Ryan Condal will do what Benioff and Weiss didn't, hand off the reins to someone else after Season 4, because it's a lot of work. And it'll shift to being the Regency show, which he considers as including the Hour of the Wolf. So 3, maybe 4 seasons, depending on how you count that. And on top of this, tell me in the comments if you read Fire and Blood. It ends very abruptly, just when the Regency ends, but it still has to deal with the rest of this guy's reign for 20 years. There's many dangling plot threads. The last 4 dragons aren't dead yet. What Alice Rivers is doing seems like a really major thread that's going somewhere. Cregan Stark is still alive by the end of this. Cregan lives to be very old. He lives at least through the conquest of Dorne, possibly up to the first Blackfire Rebellion. I did the math that he would have been 88 during the first Blackfire Rebellion, and they do say he was an old man. He lived to be very old, so who knows? He probably wouldn't be a major character. By that point, it's more about his children, but he'd be this other guy in the background in the later shows. But point is, I think we'd see a continuation of the surviving characters from Dance of the Dragons now as adults in the Regency show, but the style is very different. It's this aftermath era of the devastation, a lot of court intrigue among the Regency Council, and there's like 3 or 4 seasons worth of material in that. It's just smaller scale, smaller scope. It's a follow-up show. And I think they should do it just backburnered, secondary to this Targaryen Conquest show. But they'd both be running concurrently. I think that's what they're going to do, just in terms of chronologically, you just keep going into the Regency, because if House of the Dragon is still a hit, people want to see what happened. Meanwhile, the 3rd thing in Phase 2 would logically be that Dunk and Egg would keep going forward, adapting the 4th through 7th novellas, which are as yet unpublished. Now, I made a whole video about this, knowing it was going to lead up to a Phases video like this, where I'm going to link it, where I figured out what are all of the unpublished Dunk and Egg stories about, because if you go through World of Ice and Fire, you can get a feel for, these are major events that a novella would revolve around. And I realized the first 7 novellas wouldn't need time skips, because they'd age in real time. There's maybe 2 or 3 years between stories. That the 7th novella story, even though the first 3 out of 12 are the only ones published, Story 7, which would be Season 7, would be the Third Blackfire Rebellion. That's a major action stopping point. And after that, the 8th novella, there's a 12-year time skip between the 7th and 8th stories. Because at the end of the Third Blackfire Rebellion, Egg's father Maekar becomes king. And nothing happens. They say no one was stupid enough to attack him. He was too powerful. 12 years where in the World Book it says nothing happens and his reign was largely uneventful. Up until Maekar dies suddenly, and there's a great council that decides Egg should be king, which you can tell is going to be the 8th novella. So there's these two halves to the lives of Dunk and Egg. There's the first half is stories 1 through 7, then stories 8 through 12 are very different, that they're not walking the earth getting in adventures anymore. It's King Egg. It's very different. So the other thing here is Phase 3 will cover the second half of the 12 Dunk and Egg stories, where I don't even call it Dunk and Egg, I call it King Egg. But I have this division between the first half of Dunk and Egg is in Phase 1, but the second half of the first half, stories 4 through 7, are Phase 2. But that makes sense just as a continuation that they'd come out slower because they're based off of outlines, not finished novellas. But just we know they're making Dunk and Egg, and I think on a calendar, chronologically, Season 7 will probably be done by the time the Conquest show is wrapping up 5 seasons. Then what would come in Phase 3? Just a logical continuation of what were the stopping points we left off at the end of Phase 2. Well, by the time we get to the fall of Maegor, you might want to make, and I've talked about this in a more recent video, could they do linker seasons about the relatively peaceful reign of Jaehaerys? I think people would want to see that. It just wouldn't be a flagship project. It would be a secondary project for like 2, maybe 3 seasons. The first season is covering early Jaehaerys, where he's picking up the pieces after Maegor, and then the second season is about his children. That's kind of how Fire and Blood is structured, where it's 12 years are really focused on the aftermath of Maegor. There's this one chapter that goes, well, and then from the year 60 after Conquest up to the Great Council in the 101 AC, this is what happened for 40 years in his relationship with his children. So it's 2, maybe 3 seasons as a smaller scale character study thing, and as a bonus linker project. It would not be a flagship, but chronologically that would come by Phase 3. What would be the contenders for flagship status? Actually 2 things which are both major shows in their own right. First off, Dunk and Egg would continue into the second half of Dunk and Egg overall, all 12 stories, adapting novellas 8 through 12. And as I have this whole separate video about this, we already worked this out, I think the second half of Dunk and Egg with King Egg overlaps so much with the Lannister story, with the rise of Tywin and the Rain Rebellion, that it makes more sense to treat both as one big combined show lasting 7 seasons. The story of Dunk and Egg would end at the tragedy of Summerhall at the end of Season 5, then Season 6 would be the 5th Blackfire Rebellion, then Season 7 would end with the Rain Rebellion itself, Tywin triumphs over everyone, and the series finale, the end of Season 7, the young king Aerys II is so impressed with Tywin crushing that rebellion he names him Hand of the King, leaving us in place for the stories to come after. But if you actually sit down and look at Dunk and Egg, that the later stories were the same siege where Egg's father dies, Tytos' older brother dies, or then the next one would be the 4th Blackfire Rebellion, the second Lannister brother died. That the Lannisters are increasingly in the later Dunk and Eggs. They're entwined with these events, and by the 10th or 11th one, young Tywin is sent to squire at the royal court. So they're not really 2 concurrent shows, they're really just one big show. Don't even bother making 2 that overlap, it's too confusing. This one big combined late King Egg / Rise of Tywin show, and Tywin wouldn't be born until Season 4 or so, but dealing with his grandparents and everything led up to that. Martin himself has said, I think the story of the Rain Rebellion and the Rise of Tywin from his grandparents' time could be 3 short books if ever took time to write it, that he wants to see it narrativized, and when he says, this could be a book, well, that means it could be a TV season. So, Phase 3, you'd have young Jaehaerys bonus stuff. You'd have this combined King Egg / Rise of Young Tywin show, which would also have younger versions of the elderly people by A Song of Ice and Fire, like Story 10 is the failed marriage alliance to Olenna Redwine, older Barristan Selmy as a character, that would be in there, and that you might consider that the backbone. But you don't need one show as the backbone, because the other logical thing, the third show I think should be in Phase 3, First Blackfire Rebellion. Now keep in mind, when I've said this consistently, I don't think First Blackfire Rebellion should be like a 1 or 2 season show. I think it should be a 5-season show culminating in the first Blackfire Rebellion in the final season as the climax. Because just going through the Targaryen history chronologically, there isn't much linking from the end of the reign of Aegon III, the end of the Regency, end of Aegon III, through Dunk and Egg. Like, 150-ish through the year 200-ish after Conquest. What's the through line? And I realized the through line is the life and aftermath of Aegon IV the Unworthy. That it starts when his father, Viserys II, is Hand of the King to his cousins, to Aegon III's children. So you've got Daeron conquering Dorne in Season 1. Then you've got Baelor the Blessed and all of his antics in Season 2. Then after a brief reign, he only reigned a year, Viserys II dies, and his idiot son, Aegon the Unworthy, becomes the Henry VIII of Westeros and really corrupt. And it's like Blackadder, Martin said. George R. Martin said, oh, it's like Blackadder, Aegon IV. He really wanted to round that out. That's like Season 3. Season 4 is his legitimate son, Daeron, comes to power, Daeron II, rising tensions with Daemon Blackfyre and the other great bastards. Then Season 5 is the actual first Blackfyre Rebellion. When I talk about this, I think there's a 5-season era, because otherwise, like, you couldn't make a spin-off about just the conquest of Dorne, or just the Blackfyre Rebellion. Why did this happen? It's the life and aftermath of Aegon IV. The Blackfyre Rebellion was dealing with the aftermath of him and his influence on his children and everything. So I see that as a 5-season show, which, just looking at a chart, chronologically should be essentially this sequel following on from the Regency show. From the end of the Regency and reign of Aegon III flows right into Conquest of Dorne, which then flows into season 1 of a Blackfyre Rebellion show. So for people, just the whole point of this video is for people arguing, do Blackfyre Rebellion 2 years from now. Why? Wouldn't it make more sense to do that after House of the Dragon Season 8, after the Regency show, basically, Seasons 5 through 8 are the Regency show? Makes more sense to just go chronologically to that, as opposed to just skipping to it. I think makes more sense. And you could debate in this model, well, which show is the flagship? First Blackfyre Rebellion or the Dunk and Egg Young Tywin show? Arguably the Dunk and Egg Tywin one, because there's more familiar characters in it, but they're still, it's less clear-cut because they're both really prominent narratives. But I think this is a pretty decent outline, just based on chronological order. What would they probably do and how much material is there written? I can't really predict what would happen in Phase 4. Because by that point, we'd have caught up, that everything would have been done in order, that they would have done linker stuff from Targaryen Conquest through Jaehaerys, through the Dance of the Dragons, through the Regency, through the life of Aegon the Unworthy, through the First Blackfyre Rebellion, which then leads into everything from Dunk and Egg with the Hedge Knight up until the death of Dunk and Egg when they're old men, and then the crowning of his grandson Aerys II, and Aerys making Tywin Lannister the Hand of the King. Everything from the landing in Aegon's conquest through Tywin being named Hand of the King the first time, you could plausibly watch in chronological order, not skipping anything, by the end of Phase 3. Then what do you do? A lot of people suggest Robert's Rebellion. Martin has consistently said he would never do that, and I don't think we're going to get that while Martin is alive, because he doesn't want to. He said it's supposed to be covered by A Song of Ice and Fire and flashbacks, and on top of that, there isn't that much material. There's 2, maybe 3 acts in the whole thing. Start of the war, the actual war, and then maybe a follow-up on the Greyjoy Rebellion. Mostly is just an excuse to show, here's the 10-year-old versions of the later main characters, here's 10-year-old Theon meeting 10-year-old Jon Snow and Robb Stark, that kind of thing. Mostly just as a follow-up linker thing. And I thought you might want to do either 6-episode seasons, or they're so short and compact, it might, given that we were having arguments about do Targaryen Conquest as a movie, 20 years from now, I think they should do Robert's Rebellion as a movie trilogy. Because they're short, there isn't that much material. It makes more sense to do it as a compact movie format. There's an argument for that, at least. That might be Phase 4. Maybe. And that would cover everything. Then what is there? 20 years from now, we're going to seriously discuss rebooting a new A Song of Ice and Fire adaptation, which actually takes the time to get it right by covering it in at least 10 seasons. This is not one show, it's like 3 shows back to back. And for those wondering about this, I'm actually trying to be conservative here, that we aren't going to seriously discuss rebooting A Song of Ice and Fire before either the books are done or Martin is dead, whichever comes first. That why would, like, right now, this month, we're not going to start discussing a reboot, because I think he's going to at least finish the 6th book. Okay? And either that or, I don't know if he's going to finish the 7th one, but either way, one of those 2 things happens, and then we discuss, would we ever reboot this? I don't even think they're going to reboot it 10 years from now. People, when the show were so addicted to that, to the nonsense and the empty spectacle Benioff and Weiss were putting out, that it was unthinkable, even after the trash of Season 5, after the trash of Season 8, rebooting it from scratch was unthinkable because they were so attached to those actors. And that sometimes you need to reboot things. Like how many superhero things have been rebooted, from X-Men to Marvel? I don't know. But I'm trying to limit this. I hope people are going to build this, I'm saying there's going to be a reboot in 20 years. I'm saying no sooner than 20 years. I'm urging restraint. That anything before 20 years is wish listing. It's not going to happen. But that's what we might do by Phase 4. But what are we going to do 20 years from now is a problem we want to have if we have full seasons every year until then. I don't know what they're going to do in terms of animation. Because we know they said there are actually 4 projects. One was E.T., one, I think, was an anthology thing. 2 of those were canceled. We don't know if the E.T. one was one of the canceled ones. Then they shifted Young Corliss to being animation. So I'm not really sure what they're doing. I think the best idea is for animation to do things in an anthology format like the Histories and Lore motion comics did, but at better budget. Because what other stories are left, I actually saw Westeros.org make a breakdown of what are spin-offs you could do when the first spin-offs are being discussed. And they went through the list and said the only other thing is like Andal invasions or Long Night stuff, but they're not a coherent story. They're vignettes, anthology stories that aren't interconnected. Tying this all together, you saw the madness of the recent leaks about that failed Long Night pilot, where, among other things, they were like cramming the Casterly Lannister origin story into the Stark origin story, when these should not be treated as interconnected, because they're not. They're separate stories. So maybe, an American Horror Story style anthology where different seasons shift to things, or I really think, Outer Limits, why am I going to that? But really, just each episode is a different story. Hour-long live-action narrative, I don't know. But the test bed for that is make an anthology animation, like Histories and Lore, but at a bigger scale. Because Histories and Lore have already covered, like in 5-minute chunks, things from the Andal invasions, things from the Long Night. They could adapt animated anthology episodes into live-action anthology episodes. Anthology format to do Andal invasions or Long Night. Other stories they could do, like I want them to do a Summer Isles thing if they're doing a Yi-Ti thing, but I think the idea is do those as animation to build up to a later phase Yi-Ti live action or Summer Isles live action or something. But in terms of the print stuff Martin actually wrote, we would have covered a lot. The big X factor, to bring it back to the beginning, like I said, is I don't know what their plans are for Nymeria, because it isn't just Nymeria. Remember, even if they do as a movie trilogy, Act 1 would be the War of the Rhoynar against Valyria at its height. So the through line would be you'd see early Targaryens in it. And this is the height of Valyria. It would be a tease for that. You could work in the Targaryen history as well, tie it all together. I increasingly think it should be a movie trilogy, but in terms of the budget that they can do, but we'll figure that out. Are they pushing Nymeria to Phase 2? They really want to make Nymeria. They've had 2 waves of pitches. The old HBO one and the new Warner Discovery one, Nymeria was a pitch in both, under different writers. And they tried to seed it really heavily in House of the Dragon Season 1 by having people reading books about Nymeria. I think if it was shifted to animation like Young Corlys was, Martin would have said that. Like when Martin made a blog post saying Corlys has been shifted to animation, he could have just as easily, if Nymeria had been shifted to animation, he would have admitted it at the same time, admitted it for both of them. I don't know what they're doing. The other issue is for these 3 phases, just covering these are the print material that you could cover pretty easily. I listed 3 things per phase, but I did say because of shows alternating, taking a year off, across a 7-season stretch, a 7-calendar-year stretch, you could have 4 TV shows within a phase, even though there's only 3 per calendar year. 5, I think, would be overdoing it. I mean, animation, yeah, but you might be able to squeeze in a 4th show if this is really a huge franchise. Like Marvel-level franchise, Star Wars-level franchise. The only other big project elephant in the room is Doom of Valyria prequel, Empire of Ash, which was explicitly meant to be a flagship show running 5 to 7 seasons, and having seen all the leaks about it, it was like the Essos show. It wasn't just Valyria, it was like about the Valyrian Freehold, which covers everything from Pentos down to Sothorios. A lot of it was in Sothorios and their overseas colonies. That if you love the world book, it wasn't just Valyria. A lot of it was about their tensions with their provinces and stuff. And it's like the 100 years of civil wars leading up to the Doom of Valyria. So it's like Marius versus Sulla. It's like Rome with dragons in it. And I thought he was treating it as a really, someone read the world book and then said this is a great sandbox to play in, the lands beyond Westeros, as the sandbox for a 7-season story. And even Westeros.org said if you did Doom of Valyria, you could continue into the Century of Blood. They mention that by name in House of the Dragon, in the chaotic aftermath, the free cities and former Valyrian colonies fighting each other, just characters who survived the Doom because they weren't in Valyria at the time, in the free cities, just follow up with other projects like the Rise of Bravos and stuff in the Century of Blood. I don't know, and I'm not greedy. I wish that they would be going, in Phase 2 we're going to do Doom of Valyria, Empire of Ash. That's wishful thinking on my part. They could do a 4th show, because it's not chronologically tied to the other ones. When would you do that? Would it make more sense to do Doom of Valyria after Nymeria? That the whole point is see Valyria at its height, then see what led to their fall after they conquered the Rhoynar. I don't know where to fit Doom of Valyria or Nymeria into this, even though Nymeria in particular was being discussed, but as opposed to the wish listing I've seen, tell me in the comments. I'm really worried about this. I'm not trying to declare this to you, I'm trying to convince you. Do you feel that this is a logical, common sense extension of just working out with pen and paper? What do you think the next couple of phases for 20 years will be? They're not going to make 10 major shows in the next 5 years. Some shows logically follow other shows. Blackfire Rebellion should come after Regency, which should come after Dance of the Dragons. Other things that they could work in, but you can't really have more than 3, maybe 4 things per phase. There's never really more than 3 big live-action projects in a calendar year. The exciting speculation is animation and now video games. We're talking about video games because they don't consider those as overlapping. But the big thing is, if you're worried about where are we getting more content, we're at the end of a 20-month wait for House of the Dragon Season 2. That's because, again, going back to the first thing, it takes about 2 years to gear up production. And they only started planning this out as a cinematic universe, a major IP franchise, in early 2023 when they went on a longer break, said we didn't know if Season 1 would be a hit, now we do, let's plan this out. Though, of course, the other factor is Warner Discovery doesn't want a hit 15 years from now. They want money in the next 5 years from a lot of major projects to make back stuff. So I can't juggle those 2 factors of there's delays from the strike, but Warner Discovery wants a lot of stuff sooner instead of later. But the big thing is, keep in mind, if things seem slow now, 2 years from now, we'll hit our stride as a true cinematic universe. It takes time to gear up. And if nothing else, even looking at the info we do know about Phase 1, that House of the Dragon 2 is this summer, Dunk and Egg will be next fall of 2025. As I already said in the Dunk and Egg video about this, which is shorter before this, we will never go 12 months without an active airing season again for the next 20 years. Barring another writer's strike or a pandemic or something, that the way they are planning this out, they are never going to have that long of a break again. That we had this double blow of longer production time because they didn't know if season 2 would be hit, and then the strike led to, well, it certainly affected Dunk and Egg. We will always be in this active cycle again. We will be getting multiple shows per year. I miss the level of fandom activity we had in the early days of Game of Thrones. That happy feeling before season 5 really wrecked everything. Just that happy time of like mid-2014 when a lot of the main YouTube channels only really started in 2014 when the World Book came out to discuss it. The golden age of like when they were in their prime, that like when Red Team Review, Preston Jacobs, Alt Shift X, and Glidus and stuff really started coming out there. That early, and the discussion and the real literary thing of everything in 2014. I don't miss the hype fandom that it turned into by 2017, don't get me wrong, but that level of consistent product we have not had on a decade scale, and we will. Arguably starting this summer, really hitting our stride in 2026. Tell me what you think in the comments. I will try to respond to all of them. Of what do you think of my common sense logic here of what's coming in each phase? When would they fit Nymeria or Valyria into this? I'm not really sure what animated things could fit in, because those don't even apply, because they're harder to predict. What do you think? I'm really interested.